days talking to people in the area. Mariska joins us now from Doorns. Good day, Mariska. There were concerns about Doorns following last year's violent protests by farm workers. Does it seem to have made an impact on voter turnout today?
Not at all. We're actually standing here in Stoffland, and this is one of the biggest polling stations within the Brede River municipality. And I don't know if you can see behind me, but the queues are very, very long. We spoke to people a few minutes ago, and some have been queuing for as long as 2 hours. There's certainly a lot of people here waiting their turn, patiently waiting their turn, wanting to vote. So it's been a positive day for voting, and the people are turning out in their numbers to cast their ballots here in Stoffland in Doorns.
Mariska, the indication from the IEC was that everything's ready to go. Why is there a long queue where you are?
Well, simply because this is the voting station that services the most people. In other polling stations where we were a little bit earlier, that's not far away from here, it's much quieter, but this is merely because it services the most people. It services the Stoffland informal settlement to my left here, and it also services parts of Doorns, the town itself, straight down in front of me here. So it's merely because of the number of people that are registered here to vote. But the people seem to be very patient. Those that we spoke to were happy to stand in the queue, saying they don't mind casting their vote. But also we've seen a lot of older people who they obviously give preference to go to the front of the queue. But most people are patiently waiting to cast their votes.
With it being a public holiday, some are free to come and vote, but there's expectations that some would maybe go to work first and come. Are people trying to juggle through coming to vote first, or are they doing other activities around the Doorns?
Well, it certainly seems like people tried to come to the polling stations first before they did anything else. Most people that we spoke to here at the Stoffland polling station said they were here since 9 o'clock. So I think they had a short, quick breakfast and then they made their way down to the polling station immediately. But as we all know, most people leave voting to later in the day, and then it might still get even busier here at Stoffland. But I get the sense that people came immediately to the voting station first before they go off and do something else for the day.
You've been around that area all morning, Mariska. How's the turnout been in other areas throughout the Winelands district?
Well, so far in other polling stations it's been relatively quiet. We see a trickle of people of about 10, 20 people at a time coming through, voting, then going away. Then it's quiet for a little bit. Nothing like what we've seen here in Stoffland, where it's busy from start to finish and there's long queues of people waiting. Nothing like we've seen here in the rest of the Cape Winelands district. It's going slowly but certainly smoothly. And we also had an opportunity to speak to the IEC in this area, and they all said all the polling stations were open on time. They received all their ballot papers, so it's definitely a go-ahead in the Brede River Valley as far as voting is concerned.
Mariska, thank you very much. We'll continue this conversation later on in the day. That's Mariska Botha out at Doorns. With us now is political analyst Zulethu Dorobe from the University of Cape Town. Zulethu, there's a lot of interest on the Western Cape. Yes. We certainly have a record number of political parties contesting elections in this province. But the big players, the ANC and the DA. Let's look at the ANC. Has it managed to heal the rifts that compromised it with the previous election? Has it put together or put forward a united front that can convince voters in the Western Cape?
I think to a certain extent, yes. I think that the fact that you have a new provincial leader has meant that there's a new player, firstly, and that he's not really tainted but the kinds of issues that were there from about 2005 or so. And so, from one angle, the answer is yes. They've been able to somehow reconfigure power, and they've also been, been able to look at provincial issues with fresh eyes. However, I think that the important thing to note is that despite all of this, right, the ANC is up against a better organized DA. I think that the one place where the DA is the most organized is here, where whether or not one is looking at it from a branch level in rural areas and in urban areas, the DA is a very well-oiled provincial party machine, which means that despite the fact that the ANC has been able to reconfigure power, right, chances are is that the DA is more likely to be or to get their members out to vote today on the day than the ANC. And so therefore, despite the fact that one sees some level of stability, I don't think that in this election it is going to be enough.
We'll continue this conversation a little bit later on. Now we have to look at the Southern Cape, at George, where many young people indicated that they will not be voting. Some of their reasons are that they will not be able to change what they call a corrupt government. But with unemployment being a major issue in the town, others are hoping that their vote will bring about some change. Journalist Tanya Crost filed this report.
George is the administrative capital of the Southern Cape. But jobs are a scarce commodity. 27% of young people between 18 and 23 are unemployed. Young people in the town are aware of the problem and worried about their future. And while some feel disillusioned by government, others are hoping their vote will make a difference.
Most of the parties don't deliver the services.
And are you going to vote?
Yes, I'm going to vote because my vote might make a difference.
I'm not gonna vote. I'm sorry because this land is full of corrupt leaders. And I mean, like, what am I gonna get out of the deal if I do that? And it's not even like my vote is gonna count because there's millions in South Africa who's gonna vote. So what difference will my vote make?
Since we're gonna vote, maybe there's gonna be a change in voting, so that we're gonna vote for that party. Maybe there's going to be a change that the job opportunities can come up.
They make promises that they don't keep. So if they do keep their promises to those who they promised something to, hopefully then in our next election year I'll register and then vote.
Entrepreneurship is seen as one possible solution. But according to the George Business Chamber, it can only be achieved with government's assistance.
I think we need to help small business owners, and the government must take our hand here. To need small business owners to sustain themselves, to create jobs. It's the only way to create jobs in this town is by small business development.
More investment is needed in towns such as George. This to ensure more businesses can develop, which will lead to more job opportunities. Many young people voting hope that the party they are supporting will ensure that this investment in their town and their future will become a reality. Tanya Krause, SABC News, George.
Let's now cross to Vanessa, who is at Milnerton here in Cape Town, where Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu voted earlier. Vanessa, good day. How's the turnout at Milnerton?
Good day to you. Yes, the turnout here in Milnerton is absolutely amazing from where I'm standing since 10 o'clock this morning, and even earlier, long queues forming outside the Milnerton High School. Voters that we've been speaking to have been saying that they've come out today because they really want to make their mark. I'm joined now by Pat Stagman as well as Mr. Josh Drewster, both of whom are saying that they're very eager to cast their votes. Pat, you've been saying that you're voting, and also you have 4 grandkids voting for the very first time.
That's right. My youngest granddaughter turned 18 in March, and she registered before that, so she'll be voting. And I have another grandchild who's teaching English in South Korea, and he voted the other day.
Awesome. And Josh Drewster, you're also very eager to cast your ballot today.
Oh yes, I'm very excited, very happy. There's a nice vibe. We've made lots of friends in the queues. The time went so quick. I mean, we got here at 10:30, and we feel that we just arrived here. That's how nice it is. I like the vibe, and I like the atmosphere of everyone. We just want to make our mark and make a point.
There you have it from 2 voters here in the queue at Milnerton High School, wanting to make their mark and enjoying the atmosphere at this voting station.
Mariska, we saw, Vanessa, we saw earlier that the Arch was also voting there, and he seemed to have been mobbed by people all over at that school. How's the atmosphere there?
Well, the atmosphere when the Arch arrived was one of absolute craziness. People in the queue were happy to see him. Obviously, a large media contingent, all clamouring to hear his views. Jovial as ever, the Arch spoke very briefly, saying that he's very satisfied that in South Africa we still have the freedom to cast our ballots, comparing it to other African countries where there are civil wars, where there is unrest breaking out. And the Archbishop was not going to divulge who he's voting for today, but safe to say that he's happy that he's just cast his ballot, and he says that he's satisfied that he's had another opportunity to do so.
Vanessa, we're going to let you go to your next voting station for today's coverage. Thank you very much. Let's continue with you, Zulethu.
Yeah.
Between the 2009 elections and now, there's been new entrants, new players like the Patriotic Alliance that seemed to turn up and get new awards in by-elections. But there's also the EFF, which seems to be gaining popularity, particularly in black townships, that the DA has been trying to consolidate its support on during the past term. What's the likelihood of those new players chipping away from the two main players?
It's hard to say. I mean, if we begin with the EFF, for instance. The EFF is a new player, as you say, yes, correct. But they're also a dark horse, right? And I would like to compare how we think about the EFF now with COPE, right? We had the very same conversation in the 2009 general election with COPE. Breakaway from the ANC, Thabo Mbiki's people all upset around internal ANC issues, big noises happen, people break away. Right. And I think that we had the same discussions around the potential that COPE had, given that it was a breakaway ANC. I think that EFF, whether we're looking at it from, say, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, the Western Cape even, is going to primarily be in competition with the ANC. I don't think that the DA and the EFF are competing for the same people, even though the DA would like to go into Langa, Gugulethu, Khayelitsha and so forth and get more votes. I think that ultimately their focus has to be to get your people out on the day to vote. That is the most important thing, which means that I don't think that people won't vote for the EFF. I think that how they will perform will be a consequence of what happens to disaffected ANC voters in areas like Khayelitsha and so forth. If we then go on to the Patriotic Front, once again, same issue. I think that if we look at, say, the previous 4 elections, parties come and go. Some parties, might break the surface and may survive for one term. I think that if I look at this particular organization, they primarily are campaigning in rural areas, which have not necessarily demonstrated the kind of turnout than, say, urban areas. But if we look at the queues here, right, what we're seeing is that farm workers are coming out to vote. People in rural areas are coming out to vote, which means that there is a potential for them. But I think that given that they're new and given that they are working with a very small market, I don't think that they will have the kind of impact that people talk about small parties.
Let's talk about the impact of social movements. Abahlali baseMjondolo have turned up and backed the DA. We also have the group that was initially led by the infamous poo protesters. Seskona now coming forward and not making it clear if they're backing the ANC or they're stepping aside as a social movement. What's the likelihood of those social movements having an impact on the Western Cape vote?
I think that for the case of the DA, that's a very important move. The way that I see it is that they didn't really say that they want to join the DA, but they chose to form an alliance with them. And I think that if there was ever a saving grace for the DA, this is it. This is their important link with civil society that they didn't have, that the ANC has always monopolized, right? And I think that the significance of that won't be felt in this election. I think that people's minds around this election, which I think is less competitive than other elections, have pretty much been made up. The importance of that alliance for the DA is with the local elections. And I think that overall the DA tends to perform better in local elections than these elections. So for me, I would see that more as, well then, if the DA does grow in this election, right? What are their future prospects? This, I think, gives us some kind of view as into how that could manifest.
Well, Zulethu, thank you very much. This conversation will be continued throughout the day as we look at elections. Well, let's go for a commercial break.